The Lost Girl. Adid was a quiet, beautiful town along the coast, known for its peaceful rhythm and the warmth of its people. Most families made their living from fishing and small trade, and neighbors treated each other like kin. Among them lived Dawit and Sulamawit, a husband and wife who shared a small house at the edge of town with their 2 daughters. The elder, Rachel, was 9 years old. The younger, Bertukan, was only 7. That day began like any other, quiet, unremarkable. But by afternoon the sky began to change color. Gray clouds rolled in from the horizon, swallowing the sun whole. Sulamawit was doing laundry in the yard. Dawit stood with the neighbors, discussing the strange, restless wind. Rachel and Bertukan played by the doorstep, their laughter cutting through the gusts. Then, without warning, everything changed. First came a tremor. The ground shivered faintly, like something enormous stirring from sleep. Then a deep roar rolled in from the direction of the sea, a sound like thunder that never stopped building. Dawit turned toward the water and saw something that froze the blood in his veins, a towering wall of water, rushing toward the town. Tsunami! It's a tsunami! Everyone, run for higher ground! The cry spread through the streets like fire. Dawit sprinted for the house. Sulamawit! Grab the girls! We have to go now! Sulamawit, gripped by panic, ran to gather her daughters. She caught Bertukan with one arm and reached for Rachel with the other, but before her hand could close around her, the first wave slammed into their home. The water came with terrible force, like a giant hand tearing everything apart. Trees were uprooted. Houses collapsed. Cars floated past like discarded toys. Dawit, Sulamawit, and Bertukan clung to one another, fighting their way toward a hill in the distance. But Rachel was ripped from her mother's grip by the current. Rachel! Rachel! Sulamawit screamed with everything she had, but her voice vanished into the roar of water and wind. Rachel thrashed in the flood, calling out for her parents again and again, until the water swallowed her whole and she was gone. Part 2, The Search begins. When the wave finally receded, Adid lay in ruins. Homes were flattened. Many were dead, many more were simply missing. Dawit, Sulamawit, and Bertukan had survived, but Rachel was nowhere to be found. For weeks, Dawit and Sulamawit combed through what remained of the town, searching every shelter, every list of survivors, every rescue camp. Government agencies and aid organizations gathered names of the missing, but no record of Rachel ever surfaced. Sulamawit could not sleep without weeping. Dawit sank into a grief so heavy he could barely bring himself to work. She's alive. I know it. A mother's heart doesn't lie, Sulamawit would say, fighting to hold on to hope with both hands. Bertukan, only 7, carried her own quiet sorrow. She began playing alone, sleeping alone, missing the sister who had always been beside her. Part 3, Rachel. Rachel had been swept for miles by the flood. By sheer luck, she caught hold of a broken piece of wood and clung to it until the water calmed. Eventually, she washed ashore near a distant town, exhausted, injured, terrified, and utterly alone. A couple named Halu and Tizada found her on the shore. Childless themselves, they took her in. At first they tried to learn her name and where she came from, but Rachel, still in shock, could barely speak. She managed only fragments, something like Ray, and a town name too garbled to place. The region had been devastated by the same disaster, communication lines were down for weeks. Halu and Tizada could find no way to trace her back. Slowly, without ever meaning to replace anyone, they began to think of her as their own. They renamed her Helen. Halu and Tizada raised her with real tenderness and care. But even as a small child, Rachel, now Helen, carried a quiet ache she couldn't name. At night she dreamed of a mother named Sulamawit, a father named Dawit, a sister named Bertukan. Their faces blurred more each year, but their voices lingered somewhere she couldn't reach. As she grew, that unsettled feeling never left her. Why doesn't this feel entirely like home? Halu and Tizada are wonderful, they love me, but something is missing. Sometimes in her dreams she heard the sound of ocean water, and a woman's voice calling a name she didn't recognize as her own. Part 4, The years pass. Years went by. Helen turned 12. Dawit and Salamawit never gave up. Every year, on the anniversary of the tsunami, they walked to the shoreline and called Rachel's name into the wind, holding an old photograph between them. Bertukan, now 14, carried her sister's memory like a second heartbeat. Dawit eventually left his work altogether, devoting himself entirely to the search. He traveled between towns, registered with every missing persons center he could find, printed and distributed flyers with Rachel's photograph. Salamawit stayed home, praying, writing letters to a daughter she had no address for, letters she kept anyway, just in case. Meanwhile, in her new town, Helen kept growing. She went to school. She made friends. Halu and Tizada loved her without condition. But the hollow place inside her never filled. One day, a teacher gave a lesson on the tsunami about children who had gone missing, about families who never stopped searching. Something in Helen's chest lurched. Her heart pounded, tears fell before she understood why. Why does this feel like it's about me? She wondered. That was the day she began asking questions about who she really was. Part 5, The Truth Surfaces. Helen finally asked Halu and Tizada about her early childhood. At first, they were reluctant to say much. But she pressed, gently and persistently, until they told her everything: how they had found her after the tsunami, how they had never been able to trace her real family. The truth hit her hard. So I have another family somewhere? Where are they? Why didn't they look for me? She asked through tears. Tizada, crying too, took her hands. My love, we tried everything we could. The whole region was destroyed, we couldn't reach anyone. But you're old enough now. If you want, we can search together. Helen agreed. Together with Halu and Tizada, she began writing down every fragment she could remember from her early childhood: half a town name, the blurred shape of her mother's face, the sound of her father's voice. They turned to social media, missing persons registries, and DNA matching organizations built for exactly this kind of reunion. Part 6, Reunion. After months of searching, a caseworker at a missing children's center cross-referenced the details Helen had provided with an old case file. A girl named Rachel, missing from the town of Adat since a tsunami 9 years earlier, matched almost every detail of Helen's story. Contact was made. Dawit and Salamawit's phone rang. The moment Helen heard their voices, something inside her stirred awake. These were the voices that had lived in her dreams for years, voices she had never been able to place. A DNA test was arranged. The results came back 3 weeks later. They matched. Helen was, without question, Rachel, daughter of Dawit and Salamawit, sister of Bertukan. The reunion was soaked in tears and disbelief and joy all at once. When Rachel flew back to Adat, Dawit and Salamawit were waiting at the airport. She didn't remember their faces exactly, but the moment she saw them, her heart knew before her mind did. She ran into their arms, and the three of them held each other and wept. 9 years of grief, longing, and unbroken hope pouring out in a single embrace. Bertukan saw her sister too, changed by the years, no longer the little girl from her memory, but unmistakably Rachel. My sister, she cried, and threw her arms around her. Part 7, A New Beginning. Though Rachel had found her way back to her birth family, she never let go of Halu and Tizada, the people who had raised her through hardship, who had loved her as their own when she had no one else. The two families built a bond of their own, and Rachel carried love for both, undivided. Dawit and Salamawit, after 9 years of grief, finally felt something in them begin to heal. Rachel, though part of her childhood belonged to another family in another town, had found her way home and, at last, had come to fully understand who she was. The flood took so much from us, Salamawit would say, holding both her daughters close, but it could never take our hope. Love, no matter how far it's carried, always finds its way back. The end.